we want to consider practice, the practice of reasonable adjustments. What are they exactly? What things can we do? And circumstances where we may use them. First of all, just as a quick question to you, who here can say they've applied a reasonable adjustment in assessment? Hands up. A few people have applied them before. Is there any examples people can shout out things they've done? Scribing, very good. Sorry? Extra time, okay. Reader, well, very good, okay. So scribing is a big one, certainly. Scribing is one up there as far as they go. There are lots of them, and we're going to run through some now. There will be ones that are not on this list. This is not an exclusive list. It's the main list though. And if there are others that you think you may be able to use or want to use, then I recommend you pick up the phone first and check with the staff here in the compliance department. But there is a list. There's a list, and in fact I'll just draw your attention at this point to these documents, which you may or may not have. Every centre should have this. This is a new reasonable adjustment special consideration policy, which your centre needs to adopt. So you can see it's purple. They're purple now, so if you've got purple things, then you know you're on the right track. So make sure you've got one of those. And centre handbook, long awaited. Make sure you've got one of these. Your centre will have had these things sent out to them. Make sure you have a copy. It does go over a lot of most of the things we're talking about today will be detailed in here to a greater or lesser extent. The issues or the particular adjustments we can make are listed in here, and there's information on them in here as well. Well, particularly in this one rather than this one, but have both of them. Be familiar with both. Okay, so reasonable adjustments. We can categorise reasonable adjustments into 5 groups, general groups. So we've got changes to assessment conditions. That's a general area. The use of mechanical and electronic aids. Modifications to the presentation of assessment material. So that is basically what you may use to elicit or extract evidence from your learners, how you get them to present evidence. The presentation of evidence, so the ways your learner will generate the evidence of assessment. And then the use of access facilitators. An example, of course, we have here today of access facilitator. So we have 5 main categories of assessment. So first of all, we're going to look at changes to the conditions. Extra time has been mentioned. Extra time is, I suppose, in the severity of adjustment is probably lower on the scale. So we're looking at situations where the processing speed of the learner is affected, and also where there is a time constraint to assessment. If you have a learner that needs more time, but there is no issue of time with your assessment, then there is no reasonable adjustment. The learner just will complete their assessment in whatever time they require. But it may well be that you will need to have some sort of time constraint, or there will be a specific time constraint, in which case you will apply extra time. Usually this is more about consistency and approach. You need to have some sort of guidelines as to how long they're going to take in their assessment. So it may be that in those situations a learner may need extra time. We cannot apply extra time where timing is crucial to the assessment. For example, a typing speed test is given here. Whether anyone does those, I don't know. Or if we're going to invalidate the assessment criteria by extending the time. So we must be mindful of those issues. Application of extra time is at the discretion of your centre, and it also should reflect the severity of the requirement of the learner. So we shouldn't be giving learners vast amounts of extra time if we feel they don't need it. And if a learner needs a lot of extra time, we shouldn't reduce that for any reason. We should allow them what's required that's reasonable. Okay? So there's no unlimited extra time, but it needs to be reasonably applied. It needs to be appropriate. Now, extra times are categorised as less than or greater than 25% extra. In practical terms, this doesn't make any difference to how we apply them, but just so you're aware of that. Often I think people may think extra time is not important, it's not significant. But if you have a particular timing for your assessment that they're to work within, then we'd consider that a reasonable adjustment. Okay, another adjustment to the assessment conditions will be supervised rest breaks. This is specifically again where the assessment is time constrained. Rather than giving extra time, particularly for completion of assessment, it's giving the learner a period of time for whatever reason they need within what would otherwise be their assessment time. So we must be careful not to deduct this from the timing of the assessment. It's not taken away. They must maintain the same amount of time as other learners for their assessment. Again, we must be careful in situations where timing is crucial, or we could possibly invalidate criteria. Not sure where that might be, but you may come across a situation where it is. Be on your guard. We've got to be careful of those things. During a supervised rest break, learners must be fully supervised. Now, obviously, we're not expecting you to sit in the toilet with them, but you must supervise them and make sure that they're not engaging in any cheating or doing anything which would be inappropriate with regard to the assessment. So assessment conditions must be maintained as them and their work. So their work, if they're going to be taking a rest break, their work must remain within a situation of assessment conditions, and they must be supervised as much as is possible or reasonable. Okay, the organisation of the assessment room. Now, we can make very simple adjustments to cater for learners with particular needs by reorganising the layout of the room. Learners may benefit from being at the front. They may benefit from being near a window. If issues of eyesight are an issue, visual impairment's an issue. Learners with hearing impairment certainly would be best seated at the front. And there may be adjustments we can make for other physical disabilities, armrests, obviously space for wheelchairs, various things like that. Obviously access issues are something else as well. We need to consider if your centre does not provide access to learners, you could be in big trouble these days. So having access for learners with physical disability is a key consideration as well in terms of the organisation of the room. Now, that may be stretching into other adjustments, but we could consider the organisation of our assessment room. Autistic learners may benefit from having visual or noise stimuli removed. So, ticking clock, an example, fancy pictures around the room which may distract. These can be removed very simply. That is an adjustment. We're making an adjustment there. You may see it as something, well, not very important, but it's good to keep a record of that. You've done that. You're making every effort to allow these learners the facility to engage in learning. And as minor as the situation may be in terms of reorganising your room, please keep a record of it. Obviously, it may benefit one learner. It's going to apply to everybody. It'll be there to benefit one learner in particular. We don't want it to disadvantage learners. As another area, be careful if you're reorganising your room. Be careful that you're maybe giving an advantage to one and a disadvantage to another, or empowering one, if you like, but disadvantaging someone as a consequence. We don't want that either. So in organising your assessment room, please be careful. Okay, another adjustment to the conditions, another category of adjustment are the assessment conditions. So we have the possibility of separate assessment accommodation, which could also be an alternative venue for assessment for your learners. Now, it may be that you need to accommodate learners separately in order not to disturb learners that do not need the adjustment. For example, if you're using a reader, that could disturb the other learners in the assessment. Now, as a principle, we'd like you to keep your learners integrated in the group. We don't want to be hiving people off. We don't want to be moving them out. We want to try and avoid separate accommodation as much as possible. But it may be that you'll need to use separate accommodation, maybe for particular equipment that's used for a reader, for an interpreter. You can make the judgment on that. That's at your discretion, and we hope that's not the case, but you may need to do that. If there are exam conditions, maintain usual exam conditions for that. So again, if the learners moved away from the main body of learners, the conditions apply the same to them in terms of their assessment. We don't change other issues. We don't ignore them out there, we're getting on with it there. We need to make sure that the conditions are maintained the same. Okay. Well, now you look at the use of electronic and mechanical aids. This may not be something you come across. If using these or allowing the use of these, we must make sure that learners are sufficiently practiced in their application. They're not something that's new to them. Again, we may need to accommodate them separately. It's a possibility. Please be sure to consult OCNI if you're unsure of the impact of a new technology. This is use of technology in assessment to support a learner. There are issues that may arise. It's wise to take specialist advice if it's the first time. Use of speech or screen reading software. Now, this is becoming more commonplace. It may be that you have this installed on laptops or computer equipment that you're using, which may be used in assessment. We should be careful that we do not use speech or screen reading software where reading is a competence being assessed. That goes without saying. I mean, to be aware that software that we use does not introduce other issues which would need, also introduce a hidden assessment agenda which would need mastering the use of the software. So if the software is something complex or difficult for the learner, we're going to be adding considerably to the burden upon that learner. We need to be careful that that's appropriate. So learners should be familiar with the use of the technology before assessment. Okay, bilingual dictionaries. Now, there are certain assessments that require the creation of bilingual dictionaries. I know there's people here that may be involved in community interpreting assessments in which learners will develop their own bilingual dictionaries. We're not talking about that, we're talking about ones provided for learners to support them in assessment. So knowledge and comprehension of English, situation where the knowledge and comprehension of English may impair their ability to complete assessment. So it may be used if English is not the language that they're used to. That applies to Welsh and Irish too, and British Sign Language, Irish Sign Language. We may wish to allow extra time alongside the use of bilingual dictionaries, because the extra time may be incurred for using them. Again, something which you need to consider in application of such an adjustment. There are assessments where these will be expressly forbidden, however. Centres should check the dictionaries which are being used to ensure that they don't contain notes or not used as a facility for cheating among learners, given an unfair advantage. They're not storing information which is being assessed that they shouldn't be referring to during the assessment, or that the software doesn't have other functionality which would confer advantage which they don't need. So they're factors to consider if you were to use such aids. Okay, looking at modifications we can make to assessment. A very simple one is enlarged format. Again, for a learner with a visual impairment, we could quite simply enlarge the format of the paperwork they receive, their assessment materials. If they're completing an assessment booklet, we could quite simply enlarge the format of that to cater for them if that's suitable. We need to be careful to retain original layout and visual presentation as much as is possible. Suitably modified enlarged paper with simplified layout and reduced content. So we can approach this in different ways. If you are looking for OCNI to support you in the enlargement of format, which could be for a learner assessment booklet which has been provided for you, then you're asked to allow 10 weeks for that to be done. This is for an externally set assessment. It may not be that you are applying externally set assessments if you are 10 weeks. But this is something you can do. It may be something that you've done and thought, well, I'll just enlarge the font size to font 16 for the paperwork here. This is a reasonable adjustment. And again, we'd like you to record that you've done this, you've made this adjustment. Okay, use of Braille. So if we're going to Brailleise a assessment, we need to be careful to retain diagrams, obviously, in their original form, remove any visual content prior to brailing. If you're looking to have support in this, 4 weeks prior to date of assessment as a minimum. That's for externally set materials. If you are looking for support in doing this from OCNI, then there may well be costs incurred. So please be sure that you want to use them and are going to use Braille.
Right, can I just ask a
Yes.
question?
Yes.
Can you just go back to large
Yes.
formats there? When you're saying that anything about 16 has to be a standard?
No. That is usually seen as easy read font. That's why I
And
quoted that.
What would OCN standard be?
Oh, is it 11 or 12? Is it? Yeah, 12 is it? 12.
14 would be one RNIB suggested.
Is that right?
Format,
Okay.
yeah, so
Okay.
maybe OCN should kind of have a look at
Yeah,
that.
that's a good suggestion. Yeah. Okay. We'll take that on board. Certainly. Okay. Right then. A signer. Now, it wasn't until recently that I was aware there was more than one sign language, so I must confess my ignorance. I was educated in this matter, but we can use a signer to support a learner where if there's no interpreter available, or no other sort of interpreter available, if we maybe use a mechanical aid. Written assessment material can also be modified to support signer, or support the use of a signer. Modified assessment material should contain the same questions and expect the same answers. And we can also obviously use DVDs if we need to in this modification. Now, just to be clear, this is what we're talking about here is not the generation of evidence. We're talking about how we get the evidence from the learner. So if you were in a assessment situation where you are asking the learner a question to maybe demonstrate something, then this is where you would use that. It may be that the learner who requires a signer can read. They don't need maybe not need a signer for reading, but if you're asking them a question to draw information for assessment, ask them to do something, that's what we're talking about here specifically. Okay, use of coloured paper. We can modify assessment materials to change the colour from white to yellow or whatever, which may suit learners. On-screen background colours also. This is we may see these as trivial, but these are modifications which we want to keep on top. We may use audio format for presenting written assessment material if we have a visual impairment. Obviously this isn't suitable if reading's being assessed. I'm not sure how that, if we're using Braille, obviously that's another situation, but it's not suitable if there's visual content crucial to the questions. Centre will be responsible for the security and completion of audio material and the functioning of playback equipment. So we need you to make sure if you're going to apply an audio adjustment, you need to be able to use the equipment properly and have the equipment there. Okay, so moving on to what's probably one of the more important sections or categories of adjustment, how the learner presents their evidence. So what can we do as adjustments to support learners in presenting their evidence? These up to this point are how we capture evidence, how we arrange the circumstances of assessment. This is really what they do to generate their evidence. So with ICT, we can use devices to produce text or graphics, which we need to ensure learners are confident in their use of. We need to consider the impact of spell checkers or electronic dictionaries. And we must be careful not to create a misleading impression of learners' attainment through ICT. So we need to be careful what they can do. Are we going to allow them access to Google during the assessment? Let's be careful what they can do, have constraints on what can be used within an ICT adjustment. Okay. Again, audio. Spoken responses can be a reasonable adjustment if the learner is unable to produce visual evidence and there's no requirement for them to do that. Okay, if you do present an audio evidence, so you're recording on CD, you're recording an assessment, you need to provide a transcript for which the assessment will go along with the evidence. The one thing that comes to my mind in that is what do you do if they're producing music as evidence? Obviously you can't produce a transcript of music unless you're very clever. I don't think that would be necessary. So we're talking about verbal evidences recorded as audio. So if you're doing DJing skills or you're doing some sort of musical compositional assessment, then we expect it wouldn't really be a reasonable adjustment anyway. It could be, I suppose, in certain situations, but if this wouldn't be an adjustment anyway, you would not be required to produce a transcript for that in that situation. If it's an adjustment and if it's verbal, we will be. I couldn't imagine a situation where learners are producing music as an adjustment anyway. It will be what will be this main assessment method anyway. So, right. Okay. Centre should provide suitable and functional recording equipment. Again, equipment is important. The learner should not be responsible for providing equipment for the reasonable adjustment. You should be responsible for that. Okay, so presenting in British Sign Language or Irish Sign Language. These are not permitted if the learner is ability, or if they're not needed. In this case, the learner can write or speak in English, Irish or Welsh. So if it's a written assessment and the learner has a hearing impairment but they can write, then we should use that as the assessment. We shouldn't be diverting from that assessment method. If they can write and it's a written assessment, they should stick with that, even though they may need the signer to support them in the assessment. So what we're talking about here is if a learner is signing as an evidence, so that you may be recording them signing as the evidence. That's a key point here. That's distinct from signing to elicit evidence from them. And how we address this in terms of permissions is different. Is why we're categorising it differently. Okay, a learner can sign full responses, expressions. So expressions and names must be finger spelt. So if there's things that we don't have signs for, finger spell them. And the centre must provide an authenticated paper translation by an appropriately qualified person as an assessment evidence to go with the recorded evidence of use of sign language. Okay? We're happy enough with that. So this is strictly...
Yeah, I'm just absorbing all the information. Yeah,
good. Good. So we keep in mind this is distinct from how we how we capture the information. So how we capture it. This is about the evidence, how the learner presents their evidence. Again, Braille. Similarly, we need to have an authenticated written translation if the learner's providing evidence in Braille. Okay, a reader. Now somebody mentioned that they'd had a reader. We're looking at facilitators now. So these are people that would facilitate the assessment. A reader is somebody who will read to the learner all or parts of the assessment material. Goes without saying that we can't use a reader if reading's being assessed. And if someone is in a reading assessment and they can't read, then we probably want to look at essential skills rather than this assessment. So a reader is someone there who will read all or part of the assessment material. It may be someone can read elements of the assessment, parts they can't read. We stick to reading the bits they need to read rather than everything. To be a reader, there must not be a tutor, relative, friend or peer of the learner. So we need to bring somebody else in. If you're the assessor, then we want you to bring somebody else in to be the reader, not for you to be the reader. I suppose that's the key point. We haven't got to bring in some specialist who's going to charge you a high consultancy fee, but we want to have someone in who may be within the centre who can come in and perform that task appropriately. And wherever possible, the learner should have previous experience in working with the reader. Obviously, to work with a facilitator is something which can be possibly daunting for the learner. It could be something which would put them off. So we want to ensure that the learner is as familiar as possible with the facilitator who's going to be applying the adjustment to them. We should only use a reader when requested by the learner. The centre needs to ensure clarity about the reader's role. So the reader isn't there to give hints, isn't there to give answers out, or prompt or suggest evidence to put down for them to put down. They're there purely to read what is there in paper form before the learner, to facilitate them in that. Okay, when a reader is used, a separate invigilator is also required to ensure that is taking place. Quality issue, obviously. Someone's reading, it would be very easy for a reader to divert off from purely their reading role, to stray into other areas which are not appropriate and could undermine quality. Yes?
Sorry, again with that, because it's not under examination,
Yeah.
circumstances we don't use them.
No, okay, that's all right. I think in that situation we want to use what's appropriate and reasonable in the situation. So
could their classroom assistant, if they have learning support?
okay, learning support,
as the reader?
I would imagine that would probably be suitable, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd imagine that would be suitable. Yeah. Okay. For a learner requiring a reader and a scribe, which is a possibility, a distinct possibility. The same person may act as both, as long as we've central approval for both. So we are looking at two different reasonable adjustments, which should be processed separately, which may well work together. Okay. And we mentioned now already separate accommodation. This is what's stated. I mean, what I'm giving you there is what's stated in the policy. But we want, again, with all these things, we expect you to be using your common sense, okay? And it's reasonable. And in deciding what is reasonable, that's your discretion. We don't tell you this is reasonable. You need to demonstrate to us it's reasonable. Okay, that's the other way around. You want to say this is reasonable because. We don't tell you it's reasonable because. Okay, so if you're happy that it's not disturbing other learners, that quality is not compromised by what's being done within the framework and guidance given, that's fine. Okay. Right then, move on. Scribing. Scribing is a big one. Scribing we come across a lot. Also known as an amanuensis, scribe writes down all word processes a learner's dictated responses. So a scribe is writing down written evidence that's dictated by the learner. This may be allowed in assessments where writing or keyboarding is not competence being assessed. This could include voice recognition technology. So assistive technology as a scribe. If this is the learner's normal way of working, obviously you want to be careful that getting technology that the learner is able to use that. There's no other features that can undermine the quality of assessment. A scribe should offer no quality related comment. So again, it's writing down exactly what is being said, not adding to or taking away from the words spoken. A scribe is a person who should be provided by the centre to support the learner. So we said they're not permitted in assessment requiring word processing or ICT. So the scribe should not normally be the learner's own tutor or assessor, and if so, the awarding body should be specifically consulted. So that would be something you may want to consult OC and I about, because I think scribing is conducted by the assessors. So let's be careful of that. If we're assessing, reason that scribing's being used, we consider bringing somebody else in to scribe.
Can I just ask,
Yes.
is that specifically on the exam conditions, or is that not just?
Well, again, it depends on how we're applying this. If there's assessment going on and you're constantly distracted as a scribe, there may be issues that you can't attend to elsewhere. So I think this is just to have someone to specifically focus on that one issue will allow you to. Now again, reasonable. What is reasonable? And we said there, if there's an issue there, do speak to OCN and they'll advise you on that.
Can I ask as well?
Yes.
Sorry, quite often with our client groups, they are able to copyright. So they
Okay.
would be scribing, but in their lab book it would be their own writing.
Okay.
But it's been scribed in another page.
Okay.
If you know what I mean. So it is their words.
Okay.
And they put it in. So that is scribing, but it's not within the booklet. We wouldn't register that as scribing, whereas
Okay.
the tutor writes down and we would write beside.
Run that past me again. What?
So if I was asking someone a question,
Yes.
what was to go in their book, but they'd give me an answer, I'd write it on a piece of paper in a way that's legible and easy for them to write in. And then
Oh,
they'd
I
copy it
see.
into their book.
I've got you. Yes.
So it's
That
still
is.
scribing in effect,
This is a reasonable adjustment, isn't it? Yes, definitely.
but that's most of our clients.
It's
That's just how we test
Right.
would write.
you can. Yeah. There is an issue. There is an issue here because certainly quality is an issue here. So obviously, if they're saying something, you're writing. They're then transcribing it themselves. We've got a potential for you possibly to write things down which they haven't said, and then they copy. So that's the issue we need to be scrutinising. So yeah, that would be a reasonable adjustment, certainly. That's not
It's for the whole group, would that be part of the strategy?
part of your strategy.
Are you
It's-
writing for every individual person, what they say?
Yeah,
So with
depending on that.
10 different people say that 10 different responses,
But
so you're
it's, they're
pretty...
still getting the same,
Yeah,
it's still, it's the same, yeah.
There's
they're
a-
all still
I-
getting that same-
right.
it's not
This
one
isn't what this
person.
is not. This isn't one which is covered by this presentation. I would suggest you talk to OCNI about that, because the issue comes up with permissions, and if it's the way I would scope things, I suppose, the way I would understand the rule here, and again we'll go into this more detail later on, that if your assessment strategy is permission required, then you need to follow a process, whether or not it's, whether or not everyone's doing it or not. So that may be the situation you're in. You're not scribing, but it's a similar process, isn't it? A similar process. Now there are issues. I mean, there are issues here which this requirement's changed. Okay, it's changed. I'll go through how it's changed, and because there's so many different permutations, then working them all out can be a bit tricky. So that is something else. So please raise that again with us, and we'll consider. I'm sorry, that's not a clear answer, but I think that's as fair answer as I can give you at this point. Okay. Okay, the learner should, wherever possible, have had previous practice in working with the scribe. There should be clarity around the role the scribe will undertake, and that should be clear to the learner. And there should be some sort of invigilation of the scribe's role.
Sorry, can I just have a
Yes.
question on that? We go by JCQ rules with most of our scribes, etc. Right? And
Okay.
JCQ are saying that when we have a scribe, they can act as reader as well. We don't need two
Okay.
people.
Okay.
Do OCN, are they guided by JCQ?
No.
Or no?
Simple answer, no. I think I mentioned that with the same person. I think you mentioned that previously, that the reader one, you can be a reader and a scribe.
Right.
You
okay.
can. But they are two adjustments.
Right.
Okay.
But when you're saying an invigilator and a scribe, what's the difference between?
Well, the invigilator is going to. The invigilator is someone who is there to make sure quality is maintained by the scribe. So it's someone who's there to verify that what the scribe is doing is simply scribing, rather than, I suppose it's somebody there present who can say, I stand over what the scribe's done.
And is that just an exam conditions, or is that
Yeah,
more?
that's what I was
Well, it's a general quality procedure. So if you've got, I mean, I think if you've someone scribing, if you're saying, I'm the only person in the room, I'm scribing. What we need to do in this situation is be able to bring somebody else in, even on a temporary basis, to make sure that either they're going to be scribing and you're watching what they're doing, or being there as a verification for that, or vice versa. So points to consider, but that this is quality processes that are required.
So
Quite long.
basically,
Sorry, was that?
If you bring in someone to watch the scribe, should that only happen for one full course, and then that scribe is okay then?
Is that not
Oh, I see. Is it
exam?
test? I think there's obviously issues here that centres need to look at in terms of invigilation, and we need to consider the implications of that. Scribing is why there's a lot of scribing. So if you're saying I'm on my own delivering this, and how do we address this, then I think you probably need to consult OCNI on it, and look at that issue.
And then you need someone else to assess the scriber.
It's not so much as I suppose it's verifying the scribing. So if there's someone, it's not someone standing over their shoulder necessarily, staring at them, but the policy is stating that someone should be there to invigilate separate from the scribe.
In the organisation, I put a big demand on consistent staff.
Right.
Coming from one department to the
Okay.
other, but she can't really.
Can't, as an issue. No, this is an issue. So resources and cost are a big issue. So we need to work through these issues. Okay. I think the points you raise are really valid, and I'm going to talk about cost later on, cost and adjustment, what's reasonable, what and the cost. So we need to look at that. If it's not possible for you to provide an invigilator, then we need to consider what is reasonable. So facilitators there obviously are linked in to whether it's a modification of strategy or if it's presenting the evidence. Facilitator is going to be the key person in that. For assessments where reading or speaking and listening are being assessed, BSL ISM will only be used for the assessment rubric and instructions. So sticking to the structure of the assessment and eliciting the assessment. Okay, we need to ensure that the interpreter has the appropriate qualifications. So if you're looking for a BSL interpreter, there's two here who are appropriately qualified. So do take their business cards and you can follow them up if you need to. The signer should have prior access to the content of the assessment for preparation. And the learner should, wherever possible, have had previous experience of working with the particular interpreter. So if you can get the interpreter that they are accustomed to using, that's what we would prefer.
Can I just?
Yeah, that's all right, go on.
The interpreter and the interpreter things as well.
Yes.
Is there a standard for the appropriate qualification? Is there a standard for interpreters?
I'm sure there is.
You know, that's
Yeah, there will be. I'm sure there's appropriate qualifications.
I just
You know.
give you the answer, yeah. If you go on the NRCPD website, and then you will see that there's a list of interpreters there who have, qualified, they've been through your training, at the moment, and then they follow a code of ethics, and then, so there's everything there. It's on the NRCPD. So if you are booking an interpreter, then you can follow it up and check on the website, but you will also see that most interpreters carry a badge as well.
Okay. 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 The signer should not give the learner an unfair advantage by explanation or clarification. So a facilitator should only be giving what is presented to the other learners. Interpretation, including questions provided when a standard sign is not available, should be underlined on assessment material. So if there has to be an specific interpretation going beyond what is presented, then we should identify that in what's been done.